Years ago, I attended a seminar on criminal law. Part of the seminar dealt with representing immigrants. And I don't remember much, but the first thing that the speaker said was, don't expect logic. There's no logic to immigration law. It's a hodgepodge, and that what would be a deportable offense for one level of immigrant may not be a deportable offense for another. So that's what we're dealing with today, part of what we're dealing with today. We are clearly timely. Part of today's talk will be about the executive order attempting to do away with birthright citizenship. The 3 district courts have ruled that that can't go forward. The Trump administration is appealing to the Supreme Court for relief. A young activist at Columbia has been detained without charges and moved to Louisiana. And there are many protests about that. Today's topic is what keeps immigrants up at night. And you're going to hear from 3 people with direct knowledge about the various issues that relate to that. Rachel Hecht is an immigration attorney here in town. She has an amazing background of travel all over the world, study all over the world, has a BA from NYU, an MA in Latin American Studies, and a law degree from UCLA. She won the Chief Justice Martha Walters Award for Social Justice, the Dr. Martin Luther King Community Leader Award, and others. The second speaker will be Professor Joel Sati, an assistant professor of law at the University of Oregon, and Professor Sati's research and teaching include criminal law, immigration law, crimmigration, privacy laws, and jurisprudence. His dissertation, A Punishment of Severest Kind, Immigration Enforcement and Social Degradation. He also has a PhD in jurisprudence. And our third speaker will be Kuitlahuak Lopez Rojas, a 7th-generation Aztec nobility with Calclane indigenous Mexican heritage, deeply committed to social justice and community activism. He works for Calc, and he heads the youth program dealing with BIPOC youth. He also has a radio program called Voices of Resistance and is co-creator of the citywide Union Day Activists to address alarming suicide rate among Latino boys. You will be amazed by their presentations. The first one will be Rachel Hecht.
Hey guys, good to see you all. Recognize many of you from all these years we've all been here together. And I'm going to speak really quickly because I'm really excited about the other 2 speakers. And so I just want to lay out a few things for you all to be thinking about when we're talking about immigrants right now. The topic is, what keeps immigrants up at night. I just want to talk really quickly about who are we even talking about? Who are our immigrants? Because it's really important to parse out who we're even talking about. Everybody is really excited about helping the immigrants, but there are different ways in which that has to happen depending on, what category. First off, we have non-immigrants, and those are people who are either here lawfully on specific visas like tourist visas, student visas, temporary worker visas, all the people who plant our pinos, our pines on mountains, agricultural workers, and many of those may stay beyond the time of their visa, so they may not be in lawful status, but they may have entered in a lawful status originally. We have a huge number of DACAs. We all know who those are, people who were brought to the United States often before the age, they had to have been here before the age of 16. They continue here. Most of our people who have been granted DACA status are people who are now in their 30s and 40s. It's been that long. There are also many, many people who were not granted the status because the program was halted, but who now are in their 20s. Many, as you know, our DACAs, almost all of them were educated in this country. Not to make too big a deal of the economic argument, but we paid for that education, and we're now reaping the benefits of that education. Most of those people are in really good positions, often, high-level positions, and so, it should be concerning to us that we're even considering removing that group of people from the country. I'm not considering it, but some people apparently are. We have a lot of people in TPS status, which is the temporary protected status. Those are people who were here at the time that some disaster may have happened in their country. Some of them were actually brought here, for example, Venezuelans. As we all know, the Trump administration is thinking about removing that status and removing that. They have, in fact, removed a certain number of those people. Some of them have been here for many, many years. For example, El Salvador, that status was granted in the early 2000s, and they've remained here. Then we also have a lot of people who have come here very recently. People who in the last couple of years, for example, were admitted into the country through the registration process at the border. Many of them are seeking asylum. And many of those people, quite frankly, do not have very strong asylum claims. There's a large number of those people, in my experience anyway, who are seeking relief from general criminal behavior. They may have been subjected to extortion. It's very common in a lot of places. Or they may have been also they may have experienced random violence from cartels, or they may just be afraid because of cartels in their community. And so those are people who are in our community now, generally very good at contributing to our community, but may not win their asylum claims, and a large number of them may have already lost their asylum claims and have orders of removal. And then there are people who have been in this community who have some criminal records, and so the two groups right now who are the biggest focus for the Trump administration and who are being actively removed are people who have orders of removal and people who have criminal records that can easily found. So what are some of the concerns for these people? Well, obviously, if you're in that category that I just mentioned, if you have a previous order of removal or you have a serious criminal record, there's a huge concern that you're going to be found and removed out of the country. And if you have an order of removal, you're not likely to be able to apply to remain, unless we, as one of the attorneys up at a meeting that I had the other day, unless we muck up the system really well and file a habeas and get into federal court, oftentimes those are going to be people who are going to be immediately removed. And that's going to have immediate consequences, not just for that individual, but keep in mind, a lot of those people are people who have been in this community for many, many years. They have often U.S. citizen spouses. They have children who are born in this community. And so there's a lot of ripple effect by traumatizing, not just the individual, but also everybody related to that individual. So the question, what's keeping us up at night, keeping immigrants up at night? I'm going to tell you what's keeping me up at night, and that is probably keeping most immigrants as well, or a certain number that are subject to this, and that is the recent announcement by the Trump administration of a registration requirement. And if you haven't heard about that, the Trump administration recently announced that that all immigrants who have not already come to the attention in some way to the administration will now need to register and be fingerprinted. And that includes everybody who, even children under the age of 14, they don't need to be fingerprinted, but their parents need to register them as well. And so there are a lot of people, probably the biggest group that I see in our community, who have been here, say, under the radar for a good 30 years. They have children who were born here. They have their entire lives. Many have their own businesses, extremely productive. And I will add, people who almost always pay their taxes, because there's misconception about that. Good citizens that if they were to disappear tomorrow would not be a good thing, I don't think, for our community. And people, again, back to the ripple effect, people who, if they had to leave the country, would have a really, in my opinion, very negative effect on our community and on our U.S. citizens and in our community, who are related to them. So the registration requirement is probably the number one thing that's keeping us up at night. And so there's been a lot of talk amongst us, what should we do? Some people, one of the things that I like this idea is whether we should all be registering so that we have many, many people registering under the registration requirement. Another idea that I've been trying to float around is that, if you're going to have to register anyway, maybe you have some sort of other asylum, for example, related claim, and maybe you're better off bringing that claim forward at this point as opposed to, just registering. I guess my point is that there's a lot of talk about what we're going to do about that. What can you do as a concerned citizen? Well, we can have this discussion. I'm just gonna, so I'm gonna just really quickly separate out. I'm gonna jump now to, if you're a concerned citizen and you want to know what you might be able to do for these different people. I mean, number one, I would say, is have these discussions about what does it mean to register, what kind of advice should, how are we going to address this issue? But there are other things that I think people should be considering too, and that is going back to considering, who are these different immigrants and where do you want to spend your time and energy? Because I know there are a lot of groups organizing or saying, I want to spend all my time and energy, shepherding people to the store so that if ICE comes, or I want to be a person who looks to see, if somebody's being arrested, I'm going to record that. Great. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend your time and energy on that, but I also think that you should consider that we have a lot of people in this community, for example, the DACAs, for example, people who have been here for over 30 years. Those are not their biggest concerns. Their biggest concerns are that there be a bigger voice to help them get legislation passed that recognizes their contributions. And so I would say that a lot of my recommendation for where you would put your energy in those cases is to, one, recognize that there are a lot of Republicans that have been very pro-immigrant in the past, and that presenting a reasonable argument for certain groups of people and not just clumping everybody into one big category might have a very positive effect for that group, and saying, look, let's look at our DACAs, for example, and let's address those people. The Democrats have been resistant to that in the past because we wanted a greater, larger reform for everybody. But at this point, I think, my time's up. At this point, I think that that's something that the discussion should be open on this issue of, can we separate the groups and can we advocate for specific groups that are already here? All right, thank you, everybody. Good to see you all. Bye.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Professor Joel Sati. So my goal right now in the next 10 minutes is threefold. The first is to give you kind of the history of the 14th Amendment, and then secondly to give you the legal theory behind President Trump's executive order, and then kind of give a bit of a lay of the land about the injunctions that have been lodged in response. So birthright citizenship was added in the Constitution in 1868 with the adoption of the 14th Amendment, 3 years after the end of the Civil War. The 14th Amendment says, and I'll quote it verbatim, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside." Now, this citizenship clause was designed to overrule the 1857 Dred Scott decision, which held that a black man whose ancestors were brought into the United States and sold as slaves were not entitled to the protection of the federal courts because he was not a U.S. citizen. 11 years later, Congress amended the U.S. Constitution, adding the 14th Amendment and explicitly protecting birthright citizenship. Now, 4 decades after the adoption of the 14th Amendment in 1898, the Supreme Court interpreted the plain language of the 14th Amendment in favor of birthright citizenship. In a 6-2 decision in the case called Wong Kim Ark, United States versus Wong Kim Ark, the court held that a child born in the United States, regardless of the citizenship status of his parents, becomes, at the time of his birth, a citizen of the United States by virtue of the first clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, writing for the majority, Justice Gray explained that while the purpose of the 14th Amendment was to establish birthright citizenship for black people and former enslaved persons, the amendment's protections are not limited, quote, by color or by race. He wrote that the amendment, quote, affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory, in the allegiance and under the protection of the country, including all children born here of resident aliens. Now, Justice Fuller dissents argues that Wong Kim Ark was not a United States citizen because he could not be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Fuller's primary reasoning was that as the son of Chinese citizens who had a duty to the Emperor of China, Wong Kim Ark was thereby a, quote, alien. Now we see that argument kind of mirrored in the legal theory that motivates this, the executive order. Now, it was ironically titled, "Protecting the Meaning and the Value of American Citizenship." And after beginning the executive order by explaining that the privilege of the United States citizenship is a priceless and profound gift, end quote, the administration used the balance of order to explain why and how it planned to strip this priceless gift from so many people residing within the U.S. The order states that, quote, "The 14th Amendment has never been interpreted to extend citizenship universally to everyone born in the United States, and that the amendment excludes from birthright citizenship individuals born in the United States, but not, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof." Then the order lists groups of individuals born in the U.S. while not subject to its jurisdictions, including individuals born in the country to undocumented persons and temporary residents. Now, this order then gives a directive to administrative agencies not to issue or accept documents recognizing citizenship for individuals born in the U.S. to undocumented or unlawfully present persons. Now, this is where the litigation turns, on that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Right? Now, to square the order with precedent, the Department of Justice seems to grasp at straws. In a brief opposing the preliminary injunction barring the Trump administration from enacting the order, the DOJ argued that the Wong Kim Ark decision, quote, repeatedly relied on the premise that Wong's parents were permanent residents of the U.S. Moreover, the DOJ argues that children born in the United States to undocumented and temporary visitors are, quote, not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, because they owe a measure of allegiance to their parents' home country. So this is a almost full resurgence of Justice Fuller's dissent in Wong Kim Ark. Now, how much time do I have? Wonderful. Attorneys for 22 states, the city of San Francisco, the District of Columbia, filed a lawsuit after the day after the issuance of the executive order, arguing Trump's bid to cut off birthright citizenship is, quote, a flagrantly unlawful attempt to strip hundreds of thousands of American-born children of their citizenship and based on their parentage. The lawsuit argues that the president has no authority to eliminate a constitutional principle by executive order. Now, nonprofit groups also in New England also challenged this executive order. Now, as of March 11th, 2025, federal judges have blocked the executive order in 6 separate cases. On January 23rd, 3 days after the issuance of the order, Judge Kaufenauer of the Western District of Washington temporarily blocked the order, striking it down as blatantly unconstitutional. Judge Kaufenauer issued a temporary restraining order, 14 days in length, before extending the order to an indefinite preliminary injunction. Now, the Trump administration appealed that decision, or that injunction, to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, requesting a stay of that order. The 3-judge panel declined, instead setting the case for arguments in June of 2025. Now, one of the 3 judges, interestingly enough, was Danielle Forrest, who was a Trump appointee, who wrote that, quote, a rapid ruling would risk eroding public confidence in the judges, who must then reach their decisions apart from ideology or political preference. And then, on February 5th, Judge Deborah Boardman from the District of Maryland indefinitely blocked the executive order, issuing another preliminary injunction. Judge Boardman explained that the executive order, quote, conflicts with the plain language of the 14th Amendment, contradicts a 125-year binding Supreme Court precedent, and runs counter to the nation's 250-year history of citizenship by birth. And then on February 10th, a federal court in New Hampshire blocked the order in a lawsuit filed by the ACLU, along with other organizations. And now in an order, it was a very short one, less than 1 page long, Judge LaPlante of the District of New Hampshire issued an injunction explaining that, quote, the harm to the plaintiffs if the order is not granted outweighs the potential harm to the defendant if the order is granted. So the plaintiff being the individual and the defendant here being the administration. LaPlante also found that the issuance of the order was in the public interest. And then on February 13th, Judge Leo Sorokin of the District of Massachusetts became the 4th judge to enjoin the Trump administration's attempted revision of birthright citizenship. While facially disagreeing with Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment, the judge offered a new argument against the attack on birthright citizenship, that of unintended consequences. Sorokin wrote that, quote, allegiance in the United States arises from the fact of birth. He added, quote, it does not depend on the status of a child's parents, nor must it be exclusive, as the defendants contend. Applying the defendant's view of allegiance would mean children of dual citizens and lawful permanent residents would not be birthright citizens, a result even the defendants do not support. On March 11th, the First Circuit Court of Appeals became the 3rd appellate court to uphold an injunction against the Trump administration's birthright citizenship order. Sorokin's block on the executive order redefining birthright citizenship, the Trump administration asked the First Circuit to overturn the injunction, arguing unsuccessfully that the plaintiff states did not have standing and the claim was therefore non-justiciable. The appellate court was not convinced, affirming the injunction. So that's where we are, and I will pass it on to Kuit to finish this off. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, afternoon, I'm sorry. My name is Kuitlahuak Lopez Rojas. I'm the director of Citywide Union of Activistas, something that was created 5 or 6 years ago, last time Trump was in presidency. Going around schools in Springfield, we found out that the highest suicide rate were 12-year-old Latino boys. Self-internalizing, not having any value from everything we call the media, school, police, teachers, society. So that's how this program started. How do we save the 12-year-old versions of ourselves? For us in college, ethnic studies was our liberation. So we pivot ethnic studies to youth, BIPOC youth, Black, Native, Indigenous, API students in our community that need to hear their culture and their power and have connection to their roots. So immigrant Oregonians are our families, our neighbors, our friends, our classmates, and our colleagues. Part of what makes Oregon strong and beautiful is our state is enriched by a diversity of experiences, cultures, traditions that all of us, including immigrants, bring to our neighborhoods in Oregon. First off, I would like to acknowledge all the elders in my community for over 30 years have been doing this immigrant rights work. When it all started in the 90s, when ICE originally came here and started pushing out Latino families from Eugene. They all hid in the 90s in Springfield. That's why now Springfield, you see the vestiges of that oppression in 6 different demographics of Latinos. Not just Spanish-speaking, but Mam, Zapotec, I could go on and on. So now we have a 30% Latino base in Springfield, where a lot of institutional racism, systemic racism still exists on city council, school board, and at schools. So I would like to acknowledge these elders that we build off their work. I would like to acknowledge Guadalupe Quinn, Elena Esposa, Jim Garcia, Patricia Cortez, Armando Morales, Michael Samano, Angel Dorantes, Emilio Hernandez, and many, many more. I would like you guys to know where the county sits. Lane County leadership has demonstrated a commitment to keeping Oregonians safe. And this political moment is important to the safety of all Lane County residents. The Lane County policy reaffirmed its commitment to being a welcoming community to all people, including people from immigrant backgrounds. Sheriff Harold has met with community leaders and reiterated his department's practices in accordance with state sanctuary laws. We encourage the Lane County Board of Commissioners to make public statements reiterating their commitment to Oregon State sanctuary law. We encourage the county to make other educational and public engagement measures to protect all constituents, including to provide accessible public oversight for law enforcement. We recommend the activation of a public accountability advisory board and ask the county to take steps towards initiating this. There has been a movement of Lane County to be a sanctuary county to provide more direct support to immigrant communities as well as trans folks and provide gender-affirming care and reproductive care for all. We enthusiastically support this initiative and encourage Lane County to take steps to now move forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our local ICE Eugene field office. Not many folks know that we have a ICE field office in the federal building on 7th on downtown Eugene. It is often regarded as a renegade department. They've been doing things unlawfully practicing. We demand access to the ICE Eugene field office. This is essential to safety of our whole community. Prior to the pandemic, attorneys and allies could accompany community members to ICE check-ins. This access has been restricted and is granted in order to support community members as they show up for required appointments with ICE locally. Local elected officials may not some oversight power here. We recommend reaching out to your local elected officials and speaking up. Ultimately, it is a procedural decision that seems to be made by the Department of Homeland Security, but worth raising for the safety of our whole community. Bills. These are bills, I think, going in the future, there's going to be a lot more work going to letting the community know what bills we need to all show up for, whether it's testimonials at the state level, writing them in, or just showing up via Zoom. We as a community need to actively gather and fight these racist bills that are coming through this legislative season. So right now, Congress is considering H.R. 32, No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act, and to Defund Our Communities Act, a dangerous bill that could cut critical funds to communities in more than 24 states, including Oregon, simply for upholding Oregon values and refusing to comply with Trump's mass deportation and detention agenda. Call your members of Congress today and urge them to vote no on H.R. 32. Call the Congressional Switchboard at 202-224-3121 and ask to speak to your representative now. Sanctuary laws. We know Oregonian leads towards fairness. This is why we have sanctuary promise in our state. We have many local leaders that are immigrants and refugees. Immigrants have made great contributions to our community. On a personal effect, immigrant people pay taxes, they make our community better, and they enrich our food, our culture, and our lived-in experiences. Diversity should be the normal state of society. We need to work to uphold Oregon values. We need to organize and mobilize to protect sanctuary laws locally and to the state level. This is going to be key site of political struggle over the next few years. There will be more pushback, more state bills introduced by far-right white supremacists from outside of Oregon trying to attack our Oregon values, just like we saw in Measure 105 in 2018. Facts on detention at Northwest Immigration Center in Tacoma. Detention is a business and is a practice of terror. Immigrants taken into custody here will be transported to the Northwest Immigration Detention Center in Tacoma. Expedited removal practices now mean that people are being swiftly deported, not just held at Tacoma long enough to be in touch with legal reps or attorneys. If people want to get involved in organizing around the detention center, please check out the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. So currently, we have about 52,000 people, undocumented people in beds in detention centers currently. That's at 135% capacity on paper. Nationally, it's 38,000, and locally at the Tacoma Detention Center that holds 1,575. The rate is $165 a bed per day to the taxpayer. Latest contract, GEO and Civic Corp. These are large conglomerate corporations that have government contracts. Signed a 15-year contract for a detention center in New Jersey at the cost of $1 billion. Other existing detention centers to receive funds for renovations, slapping on coats of fresh paint for congressional visits. At Tacoma, workers previously volunteered for work assignments and were compensated at $1 a day. This is the perpetual of slavery in our country. Since January 15, 2025, the 9th District of Appeals upheld the Washington State Attorney General's decision that GEO must now pay minimum wage and pay $23.2 million in restitution judgments. This is just paying them minimum wage. This is something we need in Oregon and all states that have detention centers. We don't need to be perpetuating slavery. I'm going to talk about Muhammad Khalil. I asked all of you to call and write a letter to Val Hoyle, Ron Wyden, and Jeff Merkley, asking them to speak out about this unlawful detention of Muhammad. You can find a Democracy Now! Discussing what happened to this individual. Palestinian activist Muhammad Khalil, whose case was alarmed immigrant activists and civil rights groups. Khalil, a legal permanent resident who was married to a U.S. citizen, was arrested on immigration and customs enforcement agents in New York on Saturday and told his green card was being revoked because of his role in the Columbia University student protests last year opposing Israel's war on Gaza. He has since been moved to an ICE jail in Louisiana with little access to legal counsel or to his family, including his pregnant wife, in bed when he was taken out. I'm going to speak to my personal experience, what keeps me up at night doing this work. I've asked lawyers, a few different lawyers the last week, doing this work, doing anti-Trump work where I'm fighting for the liberation of not just to survive but thrive my immigrant community. Can I become an enemy of the state? Can I be labeled a terrorist using Homeland Security policies like they have done in the past? Can I lose my ability to due process? And can I be transported to Guantanamo Bay and be tortured till a legal team gets me out? And every lawyer said, yes, this is plausible, but we can sue. So this is what keeps me up at night. Experience of my students and families. I'm going to talk about the health. We know that mental health impact on the policies of terror. In addition to the mental health specifically, families are not showing up for the services they are eligible to receive. So families, Latino undocumented families right now aren't letting their kids go to school. They're not going to their preventative medical appointments or any of their medical appointments, and they're not shopping for groceries. Right now, I can tell you these families are depending on the lowest age members of their families, which is a calculated risk. When you send 8, 12-year-old girls to go shop for your family, to go on the bus, carry the groceries, to mandate that mission. This is where we're at. Because of the tactics of terror that the federal government is employing, people are afraid to access these services, a fear of family separation. The county and local organizations make efforts to reach out to impacted communities to get them access to the services they are eligible without further putting families in harm's way. Imagine being separated from your family for just existing. Work, fear of raids for employees and employers, uncertainty around future plans affects local businesses. I would like for everyone to acquiesce their personal power and a collective community power. The only thing at the end of the day that will save us in our communities in the United States, even when the Fourth Amendment is not being upheld right now, we as our personal power and as community power can be the resistance that we're going to stand up for that uphold our Oregon values. People often ask, what can I do? And we implore people to organize their community, your faith groups, your churches, your neighborhoods, your friends. Join Calc at www.calclane.org. Go to our websites, find support with donation, everything helps. Sign up for our newsletter on our website, get involved. Build community power, resist the forced separation of our communities, and build the kinds of welcoming, inclusive communities we all want. We've done a lot of partnerships, our organization has done a lot of partnerships with organizations that are doing good work. Across Oregon, including locally grassroots human rights activists and immigrant justice activists are mobilizing to protect and defend our communities. Oregon for All Coalition, Oregon is Home, American Friends Service Community, Interfaith Movement of Immigrant Justice, Union de Activistas, Springfield Alliance of Equity and Respect, Escudo Latino, Pacific Refugee Support Group, Oregon Community Asylum Network, Beyond Toxics, Looking Glass, Plaza de la Comunidad, NAACP, Rural Organizing Project, KEPW, Local Radio, and so many more. It's important that people understand that we're urging people to boycott Amazon, Target, and Walmart, people that aren't for workers' rights or fighting anything towards immigrant rights. We have to be creative of how we acquiesce our products, and that, So the last resources I'm going to give is the Sanctuary Promise Hotline, 1-844-924-STAY, or report online at sanctuarypromise.gov. The PERC hotline, 1-888-622-1510, City of Eugene Hate and Bias Reporting Line, 1-844-924-2427. We'll have a QR code if people want to be interested in how to volunteer and get involved, and our board is actively seeking more members to help us do this kind of restorative work. Thank you so much for your time.
Authorization from Congress, and also, is there a way that those of us who are citizens could help gum up the works by registering ourselves?
Raquel, you want to start off?
Well, Dave, I think you probably know the answer. You could probably answer that question for us better on, what. Well, I mean, so it's a two-part question. One,
Would they need authorization from Congress, or could they do it by executive order or some ad hoc rule they implemented?
all right, so that sounds to me like that's going to be the argument that's going to be brought,
To challenge it.
that'll be the challenge that'll be brought. And I, of course, don't know the answer on whether that's going to be the case, but I think that's pretty much the argument that's being brought on most of these cases. Including all these federal workers being laid off, whether they can just do these things by executive order or not.
So if hypothetically I were to get in line to register, if that comes to pass, even though I'm a U.S. citizen, but don't disclose that, as far as you know, would that be a violation of current law?
Yeah, well, that's the discussion that we're trying to put out there, is whether it makes sense. I mean, I'm guessing that there will be boxes to check that, that say, how is it that you have not registered in the past? I mean, it will depend a lot on what the application says, but.
So if they require affirming that what you're putting here is the truth, it could be.
Then there could be some penalties. I mean, the problem for us, as you know, as an attorney, is that we obviously cannot recommend that people not register. We can't recommend that people not follow the law.
Right.
And so that causes us, we can't recommend to people to do things that we think will not be in their best interest, and at the same time, we cannot recommend to people that they not follow the laws. So there's other alternatives, for example, whether to explore whether they have a good asylum claim that they have not brought forth in the past, There's problems with that because if you do not file your asylum claim within 1 year of your entry in the United States, that can be grounds to be denied asylum, even if you have a good claim. You would have to have some reason why you waited that long. So those are all issues that have to be discussed. But yeah.
Potentially.
Joel,
Yeah.
do you have any comment on the legality of forcing people to register without congressional approval?
It's a good question. I don't have anything to add other than what you've said. I think,
Paul Thompson.
Remains to be seen.
yeah, it remains to be seen. I think that's probably a really interesting question for courts to answer.
That's your basic legal answer is, it depends. Paul?
So I'm Paul Thompson, longtime City Club member, and I've got to thank you for coming today. That's really terrific. My question is primarily for Joel, but anybody can chime in if they would. And that is, during your presentation, what came to mind was all of these various legal actions kind of percolating up. And my question is, when do you think they will arrive at the Supreme Court, and what are the options of the Supreme Court when it arrives there?
That's a really good question. So I think one of the things that, right, so we've had different injunctions coming from different circuits or different districts. Now there's sort of like the issue on the merits, so thinking about the birthright citizenship question. And so one of the many things that the Supreme Court considers, so before the Supreme Court kind of decides on a case, first they have to decide that they want to hear the case, and so that's called granting certiorari. And so when it comes, so there are many considerations that the Supreme Court can consider, and one of them, which I think is probably at play here, is a topic of national significance that requires a clear articulation of federal law. And so there, I think the Supreme Court would really think about it. And so, and I think actually at least 4 justices must agree to hear the case for the case to be heard. And so that is a relatively low standard to have a case heard. And I think this is going to be that kind of case. Now there's also, not exactly a direct answer to the question, but I think also something really important is there are discussions about the scope of nationwide injunctions and judicial power, right? So we have judges, in districts, so like the District of Washington, for example, or, for example, maybe the Southern District of New York or something like that, district judges issuing injunctions that have nationwide scope. And so one of the attacks that one of the strategies that the Trump administration is employing is to really provide, or to really just lodge skepticism on the ability of judges in that position to issue those kinds of injunctions. Now, they've also asked the Supreme Court to decide on that, and the Supreme Court really has kind of sidestepped that question. But I think on the first question of the birthright citizenship itself, I think the Supreme Court will take that on, and given the posture of the Trump administration, it seems like they feel quite confident that the Supreme Court will rule in their favor. We'll see how that plays out.
One of our members, Garrett Epps, who's a professor at the law school, wrote a large exposition on the 14th Amendment years ago, I think in 2010. The phrase subject to the jurisdiction was interpreted at least then to exclude the sons and daughters of diplomats who were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and not much more other than that as an exclusion. Sir?
Good afternoon. Mike Redzian, City Club member. I don't know if this is a question or a statement, and probably, but for Raquel, you were offering different suggestions we can do for immigrants. What about hiding immigrants in our attics until Allied forces rescue us from the Nazis?
May have been a rhetorical question.
Yeah, Queen, I think we'll have to give this to you because, as I mentioned, we're not allowed to give people advice to do things that might be illegal, so.
Okay. I'm going to answer this the way it's affecting the youth of this community. Okay? A few weeks ago, I'm very transparent with my program kids. I don't sugarcoat anything. I informed them that deportation started happening in the Eugene, Springfield area. My kids' reaction to that was a moment of silence, and one of them saying, "What, the Nazis are back?" To which another student replies, "I'm Anne Frank." I wept for an hour that day when I went home. Because why are these children having to suffer these sociological pressures and having to come to that summation? Why are we in this America free when my youth are having to digest that? That's not fair, that's not equitable, that's terrorism. So that's really all I have to say about that.
Josh?
Hi, Josh Burstein. I joined City Club maybe 15 years ago-ish. And I'll preface my question to say that I took immigration law 30 years ago, so my information may be a little old. But to get in the weeds a little bit on the Khalil case, that's my question now. And obviously this week we saw him being taken on Saturday. We saw Wednesday Judge Furman in the Southern District of New York ordering that he stay in the country, albeit in Louisiana. The question I have, and it's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's a bigger picture question, is one of the filing that the Department of Homeland Security did in that case, it noted that he is lawful permanent resident starting in November of 2024. And then it said, the Secretary of State has determined that your presence or activities in the United States would have serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. And that's the reason that they're giving to ask for his removal. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that particular line.
It's interesting because my kids went to Columbia and were there during all the protests. And in fact, one of their friends, who's a good friend of Khalil's, called me on Sunday night when he was taken away. And, you know, I had this whole exciting moment where I didn't realize he was actually represented. I contacted another attorney here in Oregon, and then they had already filed the habeas, so we saw that. But during that exciting moment when I was talking to Khalil's friends, I was telling them that I thought, what happened when the ICE agents came to stop him was that they didn't realize he had become a legal permanent resident. So they told him, we're going to revoke your student visa, which they certainly, I believe, have the right to do that. Once they found out he was a legal permanent resident, in my mind, when they said, well, we're taking you anyway, because the wife went upstairs, got his green card, and they saw that he was, they said, well, we're taking you anyway, we're revoking your legal permanent residence. And I was surprised to see the government's position, because I hope I'm not feeding the government some information right now, but I thought that they were going to say, well, at the time of becoming a legal permanent resident, you were not eligible because you were a member of a terrorist supporting organization, which, right? I mean, that's a better argument. I don't know what they're thinking. But anyway, and, you know, but, well, it may or may not be, because, I mean, I think they were going to be hard pressed to make that argument. It's going to be a really interesting political fight, I mean, a judicial fight on whether, because I do think that we as American citizens do have a right to determine who can become a legal permanent resident. And your views, for example, if you're a member of the Communist Party within the last 10 years, you're not eligible for legal permanent residence. If you're a member of the Nazi Party, and we've been there before, I mean, people who have held, you know, strong political opinions that do not comport with how we think about things in this country, they are not eligible to become legal permanent resident. I think that's, you know, a decision that we as Americans have a right to make about who can become a legal permanent resident. And so I do think that's going to be a very interesting argument. Do you have some?
I think my general reaction to the Khalil news, I mean, I was shocked, and I was teaching so I teach immigration at the law school, and we were talking about immigration detention, and I think it was quite a signal that the Trump administration is going after a legal permanent resident and doing what is essentially disappearing of Khalil. And so thinking about the really negative downstream effects or the chilling effect on, you know, I kind of pair this with the colloquy that Acting S Director Tom Homan had about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doing Know Your Rights trainings, or this kind of chilling effect that doing that kind of work or engaging in what the Trump administration calls illegal protests can serve as that kind of as the predicate offense for this kind of detention, and the chilling effect that has on non-citizens, including legal permanent residents, who engage in work of this kind.
Sir?
Thank you, John Barry. I'm a short-term City Club member, having just joined 20 minutes ago.
Good.
Thank you all for your work and your courage. I wanted to ask about the journalist David Leonhardt recently wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine in which he said, around the world, progressives have come to see tight immigration restrictions as cruel or unnecessary. But what if they're actually the only way for progressive governance to flourish? And he gives two examples, middle decades of the 21st century here in the US when immigration was low, but there was a large wave of progressive policies that were implemented. And then modern day or contemporary Denmark, which is the one place where a left party has been successful, but happens to be the one place where a left party has embraced tight controls on immigration. I think this paradox, as he calls it, is somewhat challenging for many of us in this room, and so I wonder if you all have any ideas on the validity of this paradox that he points out, or responses to this idea that somehow relatively liberal immigration policies and other progressive policies are inconsistent. Thank you.
Who wants to start off with that?
I appreciate you bringing that up because I read that article as well about Denmark, and I thought it was really interesting. I haven't fully formed all my ideas about it, but I do often make the point that we are, as American citizens, and I just made this point, have the right to decide who we want our immigrants to be, and and I think we're probably, this is a group that is probably a little bit more left than the average American, and we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about what our policies should be, and probably we know that something like 70% of our population in this country is in favor of certain groups, but probably that same 70% is not in favor of just having open borders for every single person. And so in order to maintain our national identity as Americans, that's the argument that's made in the Danish context. This is a valid debate that needs to happen. So, do you have a comment on that?
I'll go after it. I don't know.
All right.
I don't know if I've really, I'm kind of in the same boat as her. I'm still kind of surmising my thoughts and just trying to go through it and see his points. I think when we have a rise of policies, they're done in a positive, intentful way. But when these things aren't directly affecting you and your family, these policies can be written differently. So I think there's power and representation when these policies are written. I think when you have the directly affected communities in the room, they can help navigate the liberation of their people. It's really hard, even when you're an ally, to ingest another person's human lived experience when you've lived another worse or better, just different. I feel like the future is just representation in political positions, that we have more representation from the BIPOC, people of color, and marginalized communities. I feel like that's how we become more inclusive, that's how we become more representative, and that this is how these policies can have a more longer lasting grassroots effect to liberate.
Sir? We have 3 minutes left for this question and the answers.
I'm Todd Boyle. There was a large protest on Tuesday at the university in front of Johnson Hall, and there were 50 or 60 people. And these are mostly people who have been involved in Palestinian issues, and obviously these genocide happening in Gaza. So it was interesting to me, experiencing this. This was an excellent panel, by the way. I learned a lot. But the main theme of that protest was framing Khalil's arrest as an attack on free speech. and freedom of expression. And it was remarkable that among these speeches, they didn't talk much at all about Gaza, but they really were concerned, and it's not only Khalil, but students and faculty all over the country have been sanctioned for participating in those protests about Gaza.
And your question is?
Oh, and my question is, why didn't we have a Palestinian rights person on the panel? I don't know, I guess that's what I would ask.
Thank you. I do have one question before we close. Joel, do you have a prediction when the case gets to the Supreme Court on the merits as to what the court will do? And we're talking about the birthright citizenship.
Yeah. No pressure. I know, right? I think there will grant certiorari. I think it'll go 5-4 against the Trump administration. I think.
And for a bonus point, do you want to list the judges?
No, just says why. Why do you think that?
Why do I think that? One, I think, I just don't think that the Trump administration really has a strong legal case, right? And so here's the thing. I think the judiciary really cares, and I say this a lot with regard to, the 1L class that I teach criminal law. Judges really care about how they're perceived, and they really care about seeming legitimate, impartial, even if their actions, even if they're not, right? Even if their actions say anything else, they like people to suspend their disbelief with regard to the judiciary, and I think a ruling that really goes to the Trump administration on this will break that down quite comprehensively. So I think it'll be 5-4 to, at least as a hat tip to the Trump administration, give it a little bit of closeness, but I think it'll go against them.
Thank you. Andrew? Thank you, folks. This concludes the program. Andrew.